Welcome to our webinar on voice search and digital assistants. I'm Malte Landwehr from Searchmetrics, and with me is Bastian Grimm from Peak Ace.
Hello. All right. So yeah, as Malte said, my name is Bastian. I run an agency called Peak Ace. We're based in Berlin, so that was actually quite easy to join the guys at Searchmetrics at the office. So we're just sitting here in the cozy Berlin. And yeah, so to kick off things, I thought I'd just give you a very quick overview on the assistants that are out there. I mean, because of just, it can be literally right now, it can be everything, right? So, I mean, obviously it can be the phone, it can be all of those like Echoes and Google Homes of the world, but maybe also some things that are less obvious. I mean, we do have fridges that come with voice interfaces. We're gonna be talking about that later a bit more. Navigation systems and all of those, right? So I think that's all kind of on this digital assistant landscape that right now feels like it is really ever growing, and I think that's also what's quite exciting about it. I think they do all have some things in common, and I mean the most obvious one, I guess, is that like this kind of user interface that we kind of know from the desktop is significantly reduced, right? So it's way less of an interface per se. We usually do not have a keyboard anymore, at least not the kind of the classic one that we know from the laptop or from the desktop. But I mean, they all do have one thing in common, and that's the interface or the way of interaction, and that's just voice, which is usually mainly more user-friendly and just more comfortable to use. We do have on the market, just again to give you a very quick overview, the most important voice interfaces right now. I mean, that's Apple's Siri. I think that's straightforward. Microsoft with Cortana, Google with their assistant, and then Alexa. I think those are the ones that are the biggest one. Bixby is a bit of a weird one. Still, that's probably also there. Like if you look at that from a market share perspective. The other thing that's hopefully not new, but I think also worth mentioning, is just the fact that mobile search overtook desktop, and that was already in 2015. And then the reason why I'm mentioning that is that within mobile, it's not that people just go crazy and now search on the mobile devices. Within mobile, we do have voice kind of within. So like 20% of those, what kind of is reported as mobile, is actually voice. And I think that's not really surprising, considering the fact that Echo, especially in the States, but not only in the States, with more than 10 million active devices, is really, really growing like crazy. And I mean, no matter whom you're really asking, there's just a massive growth being predicted for the upcoming years. I mean, if you ask ComScore, that's like 50% of all those queries will be voice driven, and Gartner goes even one step further and says like, well, 30% by 2020 are actually completely off or without any screen, which I think is a quite strong indicator for that we just really have, also from a search and SEO perspective, to take care of not only optimizing for the stuff that we've been doing in the past. So, that means that we had this display that we kind of optimized for, rather than now eventually even kind of having to optimize for any type of screenless interaction, really. The other thing, and that's the research that the guys from Stone Temple did, I think last year, just drilling into when is voice being used and why. And I think the main reason, if you just want to sum it up, it's just still faster and way easier than typing. And I mean, obviously that massively kind of depending on the situation that you're in. But I mean, I guess if you're just driving, it's just way more comfortable. I think there's nothing really new, but it's way more comfortable to do that with a voice interface rather than typing on the phone, which you shouldn't be doing anyways. And if you look at the let's say the phrases that you'd be using on, I guess it's pretty fairly and pretty obvious that on the desktop or even on the mobile phone you're unique. Versus like if you talk to a device, it's just more kind of resembling this real world conversation, I guess. Even though it's quite funny, but like I noticed that I'm even doing those weird kind of desktop like queries with my voice interfaces. So I'm not entirely sure I'm a good benchmark, but it's quite interesting to notice how you kind of self-interact with those interfaces, really. Cortana or Bing in this case was kind enough to provide some data on that. And I mean, keep in mind it's not only online, but it's also Cortana's on Windows 10. So basically, they kind of back this claim, saying that, well, it just gets way more long tail due to the fact that it's more conversational driven. Unfortunately, yet we do not have any data from Google. There's this long and ongoing discussion about Google saying that we would bring something into the Search Console. However, that's going to look like right now, it's not anything that's available, at least on a kind of a separate kind of level of analysis. That's unfortunately not the case. So for those of you who haven't yet played around or played around deeply with Home or just the Google Assistant in general, no matter on which device it's running, the easiest way to probably understand what they are doing and what data they are taking, we just run a query like, okay, Google, peak ACE AG, which is then just our company name. That would result in the device just reading the company name and then where it's located, plus the distance, how far it's away from the geographical point of where you did the query. And if you compare that to a desktop, and that's what I did here, you'll be seeing that the data mainly comes from the knowledge graph panel on the right-hand side. So they take that out of that one. But not necessarily only there. Like if you do something like points of interests or anything like that, then they'd be usually taking the stuff, at least the first 3 kind of top hits from the carousel in that case. And I said like, well, if there's more, then they just add the phrase and like, okay, these are the top 3. They going through that and so like and more results are available. So that's how it usually works. And I think that's like if you want to understand what they're picking and how they're picking it, then that's an easy way to just compare things against each other. The 2 big things in here, or the biggest thing probably, is structured data. And I think structured data, first and foremost, nowadays shouldn't mean that it is schema markup, which is available on schema.org. Basically, back in the day, founded by Google together with Yahoo and Bing. I mean, Yahoo not being around anymore. Doesn't really matter, though. Yandex picked up with it, and some others did as well. So the idea is basically to provide, kind of an extended HTML markup and some other ways of or annotations on how to define, structure and bring that into HTML. And there's obviously more than just schema. I mean, Facebook has their Open Graph tags, which is kind of a structured data format. Twitter has Twitter cards, and we have JSON link data and some older formats. So it's just not only schema, but if you want to kind of make it future-proof and just start to implement it, or looking at new stuff that's coming up, it's mainly powered with schema markup. The other thing to keep in mind, and that's a quote from Gary Ilch, is that basically, I mean, he says that he also would want it to be that they would not need that type of, you having to extend markup and bringing in additional structure. So ideally, they being Google would be kind of in a position to do that by themselves. But right now, that's just not the way it is. And I think also what you should keep in mind is obviously that they're kind of using that to train search or algorithms, just make them better in understanding things. Just a practical example really quickly. So this is how it can look like. Basically, this is the organizational markup, and what it does is basically, so there's a company name, which would be in the HTML anyways, and then you would be just extending, in this case, like a span tag, and then just say like, okay, this is the company name, or you do that for a zip code, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they go through it and pass the HTML, they would be just actually understanding that those 5 digits are indeed a postal code and not a house number or something else. Schema is pretty broad nowadays, so there's loads of different types of schema markup available. I mean, you could literally say there's almost something for everyone. Be it creative works, be it video, it could be just generic stuff like web pages, or very niche specific stuff. And I think that's what you should be looking at, especially, understand the industry that you're in, understand what type of specific information they have in here. So say you're in the pharmaceutical space and you publish something about, treatments, symptoms, and diseases. You could basically kind of mark those pages and then kind of connect them. So like, well, this is a treatment for that type of symptom. And that helps just engines to understand relations better than just by, having regular web pages without any real structured connections. Also keep in mind, though, I think that's a big misunderstanding. Just by adding schema markup, it does not necessarily mean that you would get any direct benefit in the search results. I mean, obviously for some you do, right? So if you look at job listings, for example, then schema markup makes sense because you get those site links and listings. You're not necessarily getting that for everything. However, though, it just provides more meaning and structure to existing contents. One thing that's really exciting and that's relatively new is called speakable. So the idea, and then coming back to our assistants and voice interfaces, that especially on URLs with long articles, then those devices might right now at least have a hard time picking the right excerpt and then reading the right paragraph as an answer when you're asking them to do so. And what you can do with schema and speakable markup is that you can mark up, say, like a paragraph within the page, and then the voice interfaces would understand that and then read that specific section instead of you letting them pick something randomly. I think is a big step in the right direction, even though I guess at some point we won't be needing it. But right now, at least, it makes lots of sense to just help them to pick the right content for that page. Google just implemented that in beta as well. Right now, it is only for approved news publishers, and then once you have implemented it, then you still need to go through kind of a manual approval form, but that's relatively quickly. It takes 7 and 10 days usually approved, and then your site is in. So that's something that I'd recommend you just play with, because I'm quite sure they will be extending it over from news to regular web pages rather sooner than later as well. And then we kind of, to stick a bit more with like this conversational search approach, I think one thing that's fairly obvious and it's still super big is instant or direct answers in those types of info boxes. And these ones are not so exciting. You can't do much to get in there. That's again structured data that they're taking from the different sources that they have. But what you can do and what you probably should do, especially if you're serving any types of information query, is just to look at featured snippets. And the good thing with featured snippets is that basically you don't need to be on like position number 1 to kind of be promoted into this box, but rather, I mean, they take results out of top 10, sometimes even top 20, and promote them all the way up. So that's like a nice benefit that you not necessarily have to go this kind of regular route. Featured snippets, they usually look something like this, even though there's like, especially recently again, there's lots of variety in there, but the classic ones are like text-image combinations or lists with or without images. They are tables, or on the right hand, that's probably kind of the newest one. It's those mixed types with text and then kind of inside linking to subpages. So that's like there's lots of movement in there. But the major difference is, if you notice on the bottom, there's this two links, feedback, and the other one, which is not the case for the first box that I've been showing like 2 slides earlier. Then what they also did is multifaceted featured snippets. So for some questions, is just there's not one single answer, but rather multiple answers. I haven't seen too many of them, but they also exist. So basically, whenever there's like an answer, when there's multiple answers required to one question, then you could also have those multi snippets basically. Google invested a lot in that. Last year, around 100 million new unique featured snippets. I think that kind of shows that they're really, really serious about that. And then the latest data, this is December for desktop in Germany, 7 to 8%. That was desktop of search results. And I think it's on a rising trend still. So I think nowadays we're probably more around 10 queries to get any type of those featured snippets. How do you get in there? I think the approach or the workflow didn't really change much. It's still good old SEO work. I think the major difference, and getting to that in the next slide in a second, is that you probably need to extend your classic keyword research into kind of a topical / phrase-driven approach. And one of the things that, so the rest is kind of still the same. You need content, you need to fulfill certain guidelines, that needs to have a certain length. All of that is in here. I'm going to be publishing the slides later anyway, so you can just follow through that, I guess. But the one thing that I really like, and that's what we're doing a lot with Searchmetrics as well, is basically you just pull in a keyword, and then you get all the phrases and questions around a certain topic that helps to just cluster it, and then understand what, like if I look at one keyword or like one keyword cluster, what are people actually talking about and kind of around that, and then obviously that's a good basement for feature snippets as well, so that I have the most commonly asked questions around a topic and don't need to kind of invent or think about them too much. So that's that. What else? Just a bit of a future outlook very quickly before I hand over to Malte. I think what's really exciting is that Google Assistant kind of opens up more and more. So they're now allowing custom actions or basically custom device actions where you as a developer can build kind of new things into Google Assistant that wasn't possible. So that's kind of the approach towards Alexa with their skill set. So that's, I think, really exciting. Then we do have loads of stuff and that's just one random example from home automation where they're doing loads of different things. So Ecobee is one of them, which is quite interesting. It comes with Alexa, but it allows you to connect to things like if this, then that, or Samsung Smart Things. So they're opening up just one single isolated system to different kind of software interfaces as well. So you can just kind of ultimately connect them with whatever you're going for. I think that's also really cool. Amazon obviously goes crazy on all of those, from Echo Show, where you can now do video or, cameras and weather forecast, those kind of things to, and I'm sure you have seen this crazy story with Cloud Cam, where they kind of are trying to take on Nest, which Google bought a while ago. So there's lots of stuff coming. And then even going one step further, combining this camera with Amazon Key, I think that's something that I'm not still really sure I want to do. Give the Amazon delivery guys or allow them to get into my home. I'm not a big fan of that thought, but maybe some people do like that. And they're crazily evolving with Alexa skills. So basically suggesting skills that are related to each other, opening that up. The API is getting better and better and better. So I think on the Alexa front, there's really lots of stuff happening. And I think ultimately with, for example, the Win in Las Vegas, they're done now, Echo to all the rooms. So I think ultimately with this kind of adoption rate, it just becomes way more natural and way more common to just interact with those interfaces because you just expect them to be there. I think that's also a matter of adoption at some point. The last thing I just want to briefly touch on as well is kind of mixed reality, because I think it's not only the devices, but it's also combining different worlds. So one of the really cool things that I'm very excited about is Microsoft HoloLens. So basically with HoloLens, what you can do is you can, for example, project items like a bar stool, for example, and you select that in the shop and you can project that into your into the kitchen or the living room and then just see if that fits furniture wise. So I'm assuming that might be something in the future where we might have some opportunities in terms of advertising as well. CamFind is something if you want to play around with it now. So CloudSide, they built this vision API, and the really cool thing is, so you can point it to, for example, a dog, and it's not only telling you it's a dog, it's actually telling you the race and the details. So it's they do really cool stuff with image recognition and categorization. And this is, again, something that other companies are doing as well. So Microsoft developed Caption Bot, Google bought Moodstocks, which is kind of this, they're trying to do classification of sneakers and then, bring ads into this whole process. So really, really interesting stuff going on the visual side, I guess. And I think that's really, from my perspective, one of the next big things, like camera and voice combining, and then eventually, we're not even starting on the desktop or on the phone anymore, but using those as a starting point for search queries, and how are we going to optimize for that, and how are we going to actually advertise in that kind of context. I think that's really, really an interesting one. And with that, I guess I'm pretty much done. I think we move questions to the end, and then Malte is going to take over.
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions already, but most of them you actually answered by continuing with the webinar. So I guess you hit the right topic. You mentioned earlier the Stone Temple analysis, and one of the questions they asked that I really like is, does it annoy you when other people speak commands to their phone? And 50% of people are annoyed by this. I try to live voice search. So I try to talk to my phone every day to experience this reality and not lose touch with the younger generations who don't use keyboards anymore. So I asked my colleagues, does it annoy you that whenever I go to lunch, I pull out my phone and ask, hey Siri, do I need a jacket? Well, my colleagues said it does annoy them, and all of them said it. So I guess the Stone Temple research is not very... We did a small study, actually half a year ago already, where we took an Apple HomePod, a Sonos Play 1 that has Alexa on it, and the Google Mini speaker, and asked them a couple of questions. And 115 questions, like can you order a pepperoni pizza, or will Oprah be the next US president? So we did this in our San Mateo office. and categorize the questions, of course, into informational, transactional, navigational. And the sad reality right now is that there's no device that can really satisfy all of these intents. So most of them can handle the informational questions quite well, but with anything that's more complex, you very, very quickly get into a situation where voice is not enough. And I guess that's also the reason why Amazon started making this Alexa device that now has a screen again, because there are just questions where a screen makes so much more sense, like a weather forecast for the next 7 days. I don't want to listen to my device for 6 minutes. I want to see it quickly on a screen. And among the informational questions, our data shows that right now Google is the best one at answering them, and then Alexa and Apple. And I have a bit more specific analysis that I've run on the German language, and there Google is not only the best one, they are also the ones that improve the most month over month. So in my opinion, right now, Google is really in the lead here. But it's going to be interesting how the others will develop. And I actually think among the list of the top devices, if you look at worldwide, we should not discount Baidu. They also have a device. I have to admit I forgot the name. But
Yandex has one as well, I believe.
True. But I have no idea how popular that is. But there could also be large players that come from outside of the tech space that's known in the US and Western Europe. So that's going to be really interesting development. One thing that I struggle with, and maybe you also have an opinion on this, is in the last month, I would say there were two big stories going to the news. So one was that only 2% of people who own an Alexa device actually ever bought something. So there was lots of bad press, like people have these devices, but they don't work and people don't buy. And then Capgemini did a study and they said that like a third of people who own these devices shop with them via voice. So I think the 2% is more realistic than like the 30%, but still it's interesting how different the numbers are. And I think this just proves that it really, really depends on which audience you look at and whom you ask. There are probably sub-segments of society who don't use it at all, and there are probably people who use it and will continue to use it. And then, yeah, as I said, I've prepared a couple of questions, and you are still free to ask new questions. I'll see them here on my second screen. One of the questions we got was, how should I optimize for voice search? I think the first 20 minutes pretty much answered this.
I agree. I think the takeaways for me is two things right now. So the one is that I would care about, again, as you said, it's still only informational really, but like I would really care about my featured snippets for those types of queries. And secondly, I would just strongly recommend playing with speakable markup. That will change over time, I'm very sure. At some point, I might not need it. They're probably going to extend it. Right now, their notation is a bit weird. You have to do like this XPath selector, which is probably very techy. So I assume they're going to be changing it, but I think it's a good way to just help the devices. And I'm relatively sure, I mean, Google wouldn't be rolling it out to news first when they will just keep it for that. So I think that's going to be extended relatively soon, and I would not want to miss that. So those two are the two concrete actions that I'd be taking right now. Yeah.
Makes sense. Then there's a question, is there such a thing as paid ads for voice search? And if yes, where can I purchase it?
So what I've seen recently, that's a quite interesting one. So I've been Google is picking up on audio and SEO as well. So I'm not sure if you've seen that, but they starting to integrate podcasts into the search results. There's actually a part or a subsection in the Webmaster Help where they actually talk you through how to do that. So right now it's relatively primitive. It's just based on RSS feeds and the inclusion, but nevertheless, what happened literally at the same time is that they extended their own app platform, so DoubleClick, or their own bid management platform, which now allows you to do, so you can basically buy into streams and podcasts, say on Spotify, with like a pre-recorded, audio ad, if you so will. So basically you record something like a 5-second thing, and then if that publisher on Spotify allows you to do so, you can book it in on after minute 1 point whatever, and then the spot appears. So I think we're getting into a world where actually this kind of paid ads are moving beyond just a video pre-roll or kind of those things, or just classic ads, into the audio world as well. Yeah, but I mean it's relatively new, so we haven't had yet a large use case for it, but I think that's probably where things are heading towards too. Interestingly, though, it's only available with Google and only in their own bid management. So I'll let you all judge on what that might be.
Yeah, but one thing I've seen consistently over the last 10 years is that when there is a new form of advertising and you move into it quickly, CPC, CPM in the beginning is normally really, really low.
Yeah.
So if you have a product that you think you can advertise via snippets in podcasts, I would go for it and try it out.
Yeah.
I've seen this work quite well for many early adopters. How viable it is in the long term, the future will show.
Yeah, I agree.
Then there's a question, can I measure my brand's voice impressions? So we already heard it's not yet possible in the Google Search Console, even though Google has been promising that for over a year, I believe.
Yeah, probably.
There are some approximations that I want to talk about. So one thing is that during keyword research, specifically look for natural language sentences. So not something like Queen of England age, but how old is the Queen of England? And we also saw this in the data. I believe it's from Bing, where we see that the queries on voice search are on average longer than queries on the desktop. And I would specifically look for those, see if their search volume is rising. And then especially if you look at search integrations, like is there a direct answer? Is there a knowledge graph? Is there a featured snippet? Is there a map? In these cases, I think these are typical voice search queries. But to actually know how often were they typed and how often were they spoken, right now, there's no legal way to find that out. And in the end, I don't think it matters too much, because what is important is that you are there whenever these queries are performed, and that you make the data that you have that could answer them accessible.
And I think it goes back to what we have been saying in the last years, right? Like if you do a proper a keyword cluster and then you build it out with questions and just useful content around that one keyword or that keyword cluster, and then basically go this long page versus let's do 100 subpages on one phrase and the other one, I think you will become that resource. And I think I said then you can use that list and just sort what's the most popular of those questions in between that for that keyword set, answer that more thoroughly, and then maybe stick to the points that I had in the slides. You answer short and precise, 50, 60 words. You have the questions on the page, and you build out this one massive resource, and then you're good to go. So it does not necessarily, I agree, not necessarily matter, if it's not voice or typed or just in a featured snippet. I mean, as long as you're there, you're there.
Exactly. And one other thing that I like to do is, it's a functionality that we currently have in a beta version. I like to go to a research cloud, type in any domain, and then I see for how many of the keywords of this domain a featured snippet exists and how many of these featured snippets the domain has. And that can tell you two things. Number one, if there are lots of featured snippets in a certain space, like in the keyword space of a domain, it probably means that there are use cases where you just ask a device a question and the answer is reading out the featured snippet. And then by looking at how many featured snippets this domain has, you already can estimate the voice search coverage. Of course, depending on the assistant, the source of the answer might be something else than the Google featured snippet. But I think this is the easiest way to use data that is available from the classical SEO approach and use it to estimate your voice search performance, especially right now where you can't properly measure it.
Yep.
Then there's a question that's probably more from the use case of people buying these devices. Could it happen that I accidentally buy something via Amazon Echo? Could my kids potentially buy something without my consent? There were actually a couple of news stories recently. So a 6-year-old girl apparently ordered a dollhouse and 4 pounds of cookies. Another story of a TV commercial running, and then I think it was the Echo ordered cat food. And I don't know if you have any other examples, but basically, yes, it can happen. In theory, it shouldn't happen. So you can train most devices now to recognize voice and could probably set something like a parental control to only let yourself order, not your kids. And TV spots should, in theory, be tagged so that devices recognize that these are TV commercials. But yeah, it can go wrong from time to time.
Yeah, I think it's not the end of it. I guess there will always be That's the other side, right? Like people trying to just game it one way or the other. So I think it's a danger that we need to be aware of, like also in general. I mean, it's not entirely the same, but say that all those video on demand services that run on TV, I mean, if you're not having set up parental control, then I can tell you what's going to happen and what your kids are going to do if you're still asleep at Saturday morning. So I think that's, or Sunday morning for that matter. It's a matter of responsibility, I guess, that we just need to be aware of, like with, interconnected devices all over. And then the ease of use that we sometimes do prefer, I think that's just the danger that we just need to understand in a sense and just take proper care of it. But I can totally see this happening. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a permanently unlocked phone or computer.
Exactly.
Stuff can happen. There was a question, if I tell my assistant to order a cab, what actually happens? Do they connect to a platform like Uber? There was this Google presentation recently where if you order, I think it's to get your hair cut.
Assistant demo.
Yeah, and then the assistant, I mean, maybe you can...
Oh, fire away. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Like Google says that the assistant actually calls the phone number, says, hey, I want to make a reservation, and behaves like a real human assistant. I have to admit, I'm not sure if that is real because I have a Google Home device. I talk to it regularly. I also talk to my phone regularly, and I don't feel they can handle this yet. Like I feel there are too many misunderstandings, too many things that go wrong. So I believe right now for most services, they connect to some kind of API and do it. They do not call someone to actually make an appointment.
Yeah, I agree. I think the assistant demo, if you haven't seen that, you should really, it's like from Google I/O that happened a couple of months ago. It was pretty impressive, I have to say. Like I watched it the first time, I was like, okay, that's cool. But then there was also lots of press around it, why those kind of demos are usually, clinical pre-recorded or kind of it's a not real world environment. I agree. I think this is not there yet. And it's also very hard to do, especially with like, if you do that with the cab, if you think about that globally, what service are supposed to use, then they just need to contract with someone else, which number are they supposed to call. So it's not as easy as it sounds, I guess. So I think, ultimately, right now, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, but it's probably going to change in the future. Yeah. The earlier question that we have on measuring and tracking was more like discovery, but there was also one specific question on measuring it. So I guess it's for like a defined keyword set. And then what I like to do is, again, I use featured snippets as an approximation. So this is now for the keyword set. Where Independent Co UK, I believe it is, is ranking in the UK. I look at all their keywords and look at who has the featured snippet for that keyword. So in this case, for their own keyword set, the Independent is only on position 5 in their own keyword space. So they're being outperformed by, Wikipedia and YouTube. Yeah, that's boring. But also, I believe it's the BBC, for example, who's up there on top. So this would then be a domain where I would say, okay, you could probably improve your featured snippet performance. And if your featured snippet performance is really bad, I guess your voice search performance is pretty bad. But as I said, it's an estimation. Something else that I like to do is if I have a defined keyword set that I'm really looking at, to look at the search integrations per keyword. So here's an Expedia demo project from me. So this is our featured snippet icon, and for one keyword, Wikipedia has it. So they are most likely also the voice search answer. And there are different keywords where it exists. So there is a featured snippet. So most likely a Google Assistant can deliver a voice search answer, but they don't have it. So in that case, someone else is the featured snippet source. Then again, this is an approximation, but it's the best thing you can do. And something else you can do is, of course, to look at keyword level, which URL is ranking in the featured snippet. And then that URL is most likely the voice search answer, but it's not guaranteed.
But I think using the featured snippet really makes lots of sense. I mean, there's no guarantee though, but I think that's the best approximation that we can get right now. So I think that's exactly the same way that we're doing it as well. Just looking at the featured snippets, their volume, and then how often is it coming up, and who else is ranking on it, and then just try to steal it if we don't have it yet. So.
Yeah. Then a very interesting question, which data sources are used by the various voice assistants? Do they all use Google Search? Do they all use Yelp? So I can answer the last two questions. The answer is no in both cases. They don't all use Google Search and they don't all use Yelp. There's an interesting infographic out there that basically shows that Wikipedia is quite dominant, but then for search engines, there's Bing, there's Google. As an alternative to Yelp, you can also use what's in Google Maps, what's in Bing Maps. But there's lots of cross-references, and I think this is also a evolving space. So I think there are many, many more data sources right now that are missing. And for some questions, my Google Home device is actually telling me the website, and then it says the website is saying, and that is like where the featured snippet comes in. So every website can become in a certain niche for certain questions can become the source, and then it's the players that you know who are the main sources. And depending on your use case, if you feel like you're not very present in voice search and you want to be more present, one idea might be to look at these bigger players and say, hey, can I get my data in there? Like if you have a brick and mortar business, if you have actual locations, get them in Google Maps, get them in Bing Maps, get them in TomTom, get them in Apple Maps, get them in Yelp. And then that way you have a higher chance of showing up in voice search results. And everybody must look at their own niche and see where that is going.
Yeah, I think it's a super important point, especially I'd say in Western Europe. Like if you're not managing, for example, like your Google My Business, then that's really not good. I mean, there's like all the local data, the business data they pull out of there. They recently changed it. They're changing it quite a lot in the last month. So I think they're just paying close attention to that data point as well. So I totally agree. I think you can't own them all, but at least you can provide your data points and make sure that you're in there, so that wherever they're picking it from. Because I assume that there's just one data source is good for one type of query and the other one is good for another one. And if we're not 100%, and we probably will never transparently know where they take what from, depending on which query. I'd rather make sure that it's all accurate. And I do get it's more work, but I definitely completely agree with that, to just be on the safe side.
Yeah, and we actually have a live question that kind of ties into that. Do you have any examples of voice search queries that can be satisfied where dynamic data must be pulled? So for example, something like, can I rent a double room at the Hilton in Weidendam? In that case, the assistant would need to use an API, get the information if it's available right now. I guess hotel bookings, rental cars, flights are good examples of this. Personally, I've only seen examples where people have their own skill and then it works. In any default examples in the wild.
I think it's a bit of the same problem that they have with or had with AMP as well. So AMP, when they launched it initially, the major concern from an e-commerce perspective was that due to this heavy caching and the prefetching and preloading, basically the information in the AMP was almost always outdated, and you couldn't refresh it. And then at some point they allowed at least a cache push, but even that took still takes quite a while. And then for the e-commerce specification on AMP, they changed that to that you have specific elements where you can do update the price and the availability. And I think right now, from the case that I know, it's all static, and then you have the snippet or you don't have it. And then at some point when they recrawl it, they just update the information, but there's no way to push it or inject anything live. So I think if you want to play with it, then the only way would be to have some kind of static information and build the snippet the way that it kind of forces people to click on the snippet to go through, and then you do that on the site. But I've not seen anything personally that or dynamically having kind of, even though what I have seen, and that's quite interesting, is a combination of a featured snippet, which pops up in the knowledge graph on the right-hand side. So I'm not sure if they eventually even playing around with that, just due to the fact that they might want to allow different elements on different positions with different capabilities, but that's just speculation.
Yeah, and then voice search specifically, build your own skill if you need that, or look for, if you're a hotel, look for a platform that has a skill that is used very much, get in there to grab the voice search bookings. Until this is generally available, it will be a long time. That's the Star Trek computer level style that we will need. Another question, maybe from a concerned user, can my kids access adult content via voice search? The short answer is yes, and there's a couple of videos. I don't want to read out the captions, but basically, yes, that can happen. And this is, again, one of the things you gave your kids a unlocked phone or computer. There are bad things in the internet, and sometimes you stumble upon them on accident.
Yep.
Is it possible to trigger purchases via Amazon Echo by saying certain things on radio TV? I think we already covered that in the earlier question with the accidental purchases. And there's the next level question. I was asked not to reveal who asked me this. Could an Amazon Marketplace seller grab a megaphone, run through a residential area and scream, Alexa, please buy product XYZ?
Well, I guess the answer is yes, right? Can happen. Depending on, I mean, the question is like, how well is that device trained on? I'm not sure if you have ever done that, but like compare like if it's a blank kind of device that's untrained versus is it something that's already used to the voice kind of tone of voice in that case? If that makes a difference in acceptance of queries, I don't know. I would assume so.
It depends on the device and if you set it. So for example, my Google Home is not recognizing voices because I want my guests to be able to say, play certain kind of music. But then also my Google Home cannot buy anything. So that's the other side of the story. So that's not such a big problem as with the Alexa. But yeah, then again, this is like somebody breaking into my house and using my computer where I'm logged into Amazon and clicking the buy button. From a legal perspective, this could actually be interesting at some point because you're not really breaking in, you are just shouting something. But I guess the intent is quite bad if you do that. So definitely not a business model I would recommend to any struggling Amazon resellers. Another interesting, more technical question, can I trigger paid views and ad impressions by talking to Google Home, Amazon Echo, Siri, etc.? Do voice assistant devices get cookies? I can imagine where this is coming from. Sounds a little bit similar to the previous idea of running around and telling random devices that are not owned by yourself to buy something. I think in most cases, you are served pre-fetched data that's coming from the Google index or any other index, like the featured snippet kind of thing, or from the knowledge graph in the case of Google, where they don't need to crawl a website to answer it to you.
It's not necessarily coming from a website. It is some predefined, structured, and I think it was a great article. I think Cindy Crum wrote that about kind of an entity first approach rather than sticking with this URL kind of based approach. And I think that's what we moon towards too. Because ultimately, and then the case she made, and it's a super long, I think it's actually a series of articles that you probably need a day to go through, but it's worth it though, don't get me wrong. But I think one of the concerns out of that was that basically Munich is Munich or Berlin is Berlin, and then it just comes down to localizing it, and then it's an entity and doesn't necessarily mean that you need an URL for that, but rather some kind of unique identifier. And I think that's more the way that those are going to work in the future as well. It is about structured, kind of automated approaches on processing and handling data, really, rather than sticking. I mean, right now we are, but rather sticking on the URL model. I guess.
And whoever cares about this entity first indexing, there's a really great deck that you can download on the Moscon website. I think that explains this concept very, very well and condenses this series of articles. There is, however, of course, the case that some voice assistants now have a screen to show data, and there are also YouTube videos with tutorials how to kind of like crack these and get them to behave like a normal browser that you can completely control. So potentially there are ways to generate page views, generate ad impressions, get a cookie. I don't want to think about too much why anybody would want to do this. This again sounds not like a viable business model and something that I would not recommend, but from a technical perspective, it seems there are potential use cases. Another interesting question, which devices are likely to accept voice commands in the future? TV, fridge, mirror. I think you basically mentioned these as well. Personally, I believe that the smart mirror is going to be a huge thing. So me walking into the bathroom and then it tells me, hey, Malte, hurry up. You have an early meeting because you're doing a webinar. Or tells me, relax, your first meeting is in 3 hours. You can take, I don't know,
3 showers.
Yeah, really long shower. One thing I like right now is a prototype of a fridge out there that will come to you if you ask for it. And I can totally imagine sitting on the sofa in front of the computer and, I don't know, maybe I want a cold bottle of beer or something, and then asking my fridge to come, and then it follows me and comes to me and gives me this bottle of beer. That sounds really interesting. However, I've also seen lots of comments already that people find this creepy. But yeah, potentially talking to devices, talking to many, many more devices is interesting. I can talk to my TV, but I never do it because I always need 2 or 3 tries until it understands Netflix. And Netflix is the only app I ever start on my computer, on my TV. So I've kind of like given up on speaking to my TV. But if it would understand me perfectly, I would probably do it more often.
That's the point, right? I mean, that's probably true for most of them. Like they just need still to be getting better and better, and I guess that then it just also will just increase in terms of adoption rate. Like as you said, like you would do it if it works. It's just like we're just annoyed by the fact that it doesn't work perfectly well, and I think that's the biggest case. I mean, coming to this fridge example, like one more time. I mean, this one, yeah, that's a bit crazy, I guess, but. Then again, like we had just, I think 2 or 3 years ago was just this, the first versions of fridges where they had cameras inside, and then it basically when you put stuff in, it would do an inventory, and then the inventory like on a small display would say like, well, okay, the milk is kind of empty, and then if you, I can see that, you know, this connected to something like Amazon Fresh and like a subscription model. Is not something that's totally crazy, and in fact, I'm a convenience person, to be very honest. Like I automate some of my shopping to just not waste time on it, and then I just have some stuff that's always reoccurring. I mean, obviously, not everything, but surely, like if I know that I need like 3 liters of milk a week, then that's something that I can easily do. And then you can, like, if you have an intelligent device, then you don't even need to interfere with it. So I think that's pretty cool. And
you could combine that with the Amazon delivery person being able to open your door. So they could walk in, put it in your fridge, and you would have a camera at home that records this so that they don't do any shady stuff. I could imagine myself doing it, but I think many people would not want that to happen. But yeah, I think that's something that could happen in the future. One of the last questions: will voice search make websites obsolete? I could just have a presence on Facebook, Yelp, etc., and thus give Google, Microsoft, Amazon, etc., all the data they need. Yes, you could, but it's a really stupid idea, in my opinion. And a couple of years ago, there was this trend of websites disappearing because publishers were switching to social media because it's the future. And there are two prominent examples of websites that have announced we're going to shut down. We're going to have only social media presence. And with all the examples that I know, 1 or 2 things happens. Either these brands have completely disappeared, or the website is back after 3 years. There's another example. Again, I didn't find the press release when the website came back, but it did come back. So in my opinion, even if websites become less and less important, and even if social media and voice search and digital assistants will make our lives so much easier, in the end, the only owned property you have on the internet is your website, and you should make sure it's there. Right now, it helps a lot to have your own website to control how your data gets into digital assistants and is used during voice search. So I would absolutely not give up on my website just because I think that digital assistants are gonna change the world.
I agree.
And then I think this question, should I use speakable markup, was also answered.
I mean, the how part is probably relatively easy. I mean, how right now is basically, so the answer is yes, at least in my mind. The how is relatively easy. It's just basically linked a JSON-LD format where you have to specify the ID or the XPath selector. So XPath means like this kind of folder-like logic in the markup on where this specific element resides, where then the content, so being that phrase or the chapter that you want to give to the device, so that the device is supposed to read, is actually residing in. There's good tools to generate XPath expressions. You can do it in Chrome, those kind of things. So yeah, it's relatively easy. It goes into your HTML. I believe we had on Facebook actually even a comment from someone that was then saying like, well, but what about performance? And then like saying that eventually, it's bloating up HTML, but then honestly, yeah, that's probably 3, 4, 5, 7 lines of more HTML. But to be very fair, I think most people have way different problems in terms of performance optimization than having a slight bit more HTML markup. So I would not be worried about that, to be very frank. So yeah, do it. And then again, don't forget to use the approval form or the manual approval form so that they would actually let you in for that.
Yeah, and then we have another really interesting question. So there are these skills on Alexa, and there's a similar concept for the Google Assistant. Do you know if the names are unique? So should I quickly grab my skill with a keyword like, this is the skill called hotel, or this is a skill like we did, or at least I did many years ago with domains and Twitter accounts later. Grab the skills, or are the names not unique? I honestly don't know if the names are unique. I have no idea. And I don't know what happens if you try to register a generic name as a skill. But it's an interesting question.
Go try and let us know. That would be exciting. I never tested it.
Yeah, and then we have the last question. Can you name any successful cases with actual revenue growth attributed to voice search? You know who asked this question?
Yeah, of course I know who asked the question. Is that person actually watching?
No, he's not, I believe.
Yeah, well, then we don't have to answer, I guess.
Yeah, I have to admit I don't know of any cases, but it's with any new piece of technology. If people use it super successfully, only the stupid ones go out there and tell everyone. The smart ones use it silently and are happy. And the rest of us just have to wait until the gold rush is over and until it becomes a regular part of your marketing strategy, or maybe it doesn't because it doesn't work.
I think two things also to keep in mind with that one is that, as you covered earlier, and I completely agree, it's mainly right now informational searches, so they not necessarily lead all the time directly to any transaction, only indirectly, I guess. That would also mean then, so if that's the case, it would also mean that you need to attribute, your information queries and separate them more in traffic coming from those types of things, and split them up. And then we had this problem, again, you covered that we can't differentiate, is that voice or not. So I think even if you would want to make a case, it's right now extremely hard for me personally. The way I see, for example, so the discussion, is it worth to optimize for featured snippets? I think it's more about branding and real estate right now. And then what I mean with that is that you could argue that like you do the featured snippet and then you're not getting the traffic towards your property, right? I mean, and I think that's true if you're not doing it right. And it's also true even if you do it right that you lose some. I get that. But I think what you generally should try to do, say if you go with this list style approach, what I had earlier, I mean, of course, if you have 3 list items and you show them all, no one is ever going to click. But if you have a list that is a bit more thorough and you have 5 items and then Google will not show all of them, then people again are kind of willing to click through and end up on your site again. So I think it's a matter of how you play it. It's the same like do you do the text copy that is not saying like an advertisement but has kind of a call to action in there. That's something that you need to test and that you need to test for your brand. I recall that back in the day when we had this website preview on the right-hand side. Do you remember that? When they did the preview of the search results faded out. I recall that what we did in the beginning was that we're heavily overlaying these images with click here kind of thing. So I assume it's something that I would play with is, and that we do that actually. And right now it doesn't seem to be a problem. Like the images they are picking, and then there's weird stuff going on. So they're taking images from competitive results, those kind of things. Again, this is not smart, but like you should also have a look at your images and then see if there's any type of slight branding in there. So I think it's like for just playing around with it. I haven't seen any penalties for that yet. So I think be creative, I guess. But to go back to this questions, to question specifically, it's extremely hard to attribute. I have not seen anything in public yet, no.
Yeah, so these were all the questions. Oh, there's one more live questions. Oh no, it's only somebody saying that they're going to research the thing with the unique names for the Alexa skills.
That makes sense.
So good luck with that, and please share the results. So I think we hit the 1 hour mark almost perfectly. So I guess that's it. Thanks for the really great presentation in the beginning.
Thanks for having me.
And answering all these questions. So I would say this is our goodbye from Berlin.
Cheers, bye-bye.